Welcome back to another episode of the Creators Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah Dandashy, a longtime concierge here in the West Hollywood area.
And I'm Jeff Morris. I am the CMO at Visit West Hollywood, the official tourism bureau for West Hollywood. Today we got a great show.
Yes,
Sarah,
we do.
Another good one. And I'm excited about this because Chris Epting, who is our guest today, is a longtime friend and a colleague of mine who has gone on to be a very prolific writer.
And first starting as a copywriter, he ended up becoming this author, really honing in on all these cool books that bring a sort of sense of place to a lot of things that we know from pop culture. And then he's gone on to write all these memoirs with people like
John Oates,
yeah,
the Doobie Brothers, Def Leppard.
So many cool memoirs.
And he knows West Hollywood like crazy, the history of West Hollywood.
I love, from today's conversation, it was so great because he would talk about just driving through the city and he was like, oh, this is where this happened and this is where this happened, which, I mean, what a great way to bring the city of West Hollywood to life.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. I think you're going to like this one. Creators Podcast 2024. Chris Epting. This might be one of my favorite episodes so far. We haven't even done it yet.
Well, it's mine already. It's automatically my favorite as well, so
Yeah.
we're even.
We're not biased.
First thing here. So,
Well, we have history, so it's nice when you can sit across from somebody and you've got nice history together.
yes, I was very excited about having you come on because, Sarah, for background and for anybody listening, the background, Chris and I have known each other for probably 15 years, maybe
longer
more.
than that.
20 something.
1999.
Oh my gosh.
So 25.
It feels like 15 years ago.
I'm way too young for that.
Assume that.
I don't think I've ever told you. I feel like I owe a good deal of my career to you because Chris came to the ad agency where I was working and came on as a creative director. And we just were getting clients right and left after that. We started working with the Los Angeles Clippers pretty soon after you arrived.
Ooh.
We did work for the Los Angeles Times. We did a lot of work for Ralph's Supermarkets. We did IHOP for a long time.
Yeah, it was a lot.
It was a lot.
In a very short period, we had a very productive couple of years, which was really fun.
Yes.
We shook it up.
Yes. And Chris has always been one of the best storytellers that I've ever known. And I can't wait to get into this because, as we were talking about earlier today, you're such a prolific writer now and have written more than 40 books. And
A few, casually a few.
Yeah, I don't really count them, but I think it's like 45, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
But like you said, I like telling stories, whether it was writing commercials or then writing about popular culture, which is something I was always interested in and always wanted to be an author. So made that transition, a number of years ago. So
I'm sorry, but what was your first book? Was it?
I was going to ask that.
Oh, sorry. Am I jumping ahead?
No,
there was
not
actually
jumping ahead.
two. There were two books. When I kind of decided to test that water and get out of advertising just for like a year and see what that would be like, there were two books I always wanted to write. And one ended up being called James Dean Died Here, which was about going and finding places where stuff happened, just weird cultural, where there'd be no sign to tell you that. When I was a kid in New York, I was maybe 11 years old. I read an article about Marilyn Monroe, and it showed her in the 7-Year Itch where her dress billows up.
Yeah.
And it identified a subway grate in New York at the northwest corner of 52nd and Lexington Avenue.
Noted.
As a kid, I thought, that's really cool. Like if you know that. And then the next time we were in the city, I went there and I saw it and I thought, like, I know what nobody else walking over it knows. I know the story of that thing. I know there's got to be a lot of other places like that. So that sort of set me off on this quest to find those places. So I always wanted to write a book about that, about hundreds of places that you might walk by every day and not know the
history
significance.
behind.
And the other one was a book that ended up being called Roadside Baseball, which was similar in that it was just, I love baseball history. And when I was a kid and went to the Hall of Fame the first time, I went looking for that. Does that book exist? And it didn't. So in my head, I thought, I'm going to do that someday.
I love it.
And somehow, some way, those two books came out on the same day. Two different publishers.
Oh,
which
wow.
is craziest. Like the two things I always wanted to do were released on the same day. And that for me was kind of the launching point they found audiences, and, publishers, if that happens, they want you to write more of those books. So that kind of started it.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so cool. That must have been an interesting moment where you were like, okay, I think I'm on the right path.
It was surreal. NPR made the James Dean Died Here book like its book of the summer, which was cool. So I would go on each week and talk about road trips and where to find these places. And that, that was sort of, for a lot of people, that notion of offbeat geographic travel.
Yeah.
Those books kind of help start that. So,
Totally.
You become like a little quasi-expert
Yeah.
in that realm. And so that leads to doing other things and writing articles and, more books and things. So the timing was right.
Yeah.
So James Dean Died Here takes place all across the country. Like, there's obviously things that happened here in LA, right? Because James Dean died here.
It ends up being very LA centric. There's no way around it, because a book like that, it covers all 50 states and Canada, and I think even part of Mexico. But, Southern California in particular is such a hotbed of cultural intrigue and event and occurrence that, if you look in the back, California, it's very heavy, especially Southern California.
Which would totally make sense. So, okay, why don't we kind of bring everyone up to speed? So you're originally from New York, went to school Emerson, right?
In Boston.
And then in Boston, yeah. And then, so what ends up bringing you out here? How do you get to Southern California?
I was working at an ad agency in New York because I wanted to be a writer.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I had a very unique experience where when I decided I wanted to be a writer in about 5th or 6th grade, my father said, well, we have a very well-known fiction writer who lives nearby. His name is John Cheever, a lion of literature of the 20th century. And I didn't know that. I just, my father said, write him. So I wrote him a letter asking him for some advice, which led to this mentorship till I was in college, till he passed away, which really showed me like what being a writer looked like. You know what I mean? Like, I'd go to his house, and that to me was like what a writer's life was, which I aspired to. But you get out of college and no one's hiring writers.
Yeah.
But I had grown up, my dad was an advertising executive. You ever watch the show Mad Men? Like, I grew up in that era.
Wow.
That was the whole New York City, Madison Avenue thing. And I knew that in creative departments, you could be creative and you could wear jeans to work every day, which I loved. And so I thought, well, that's what I'll do. I'll be a copywriter. So that was my first job. And I did that in New York for a number of years. And then I had a job opportunity out here. My mother and sisters had moved out here, and I missed them. My sisters went to school out here. And so, and I always loved California. When our first trip to California as kids, and I was like 11, I just passed it coming over here to the Century Plaza Hotel. I ran into Alfred Hitchcock's stomach.
Okay, so wait, yes. Tell us about this story, because I did see it on your site.
It was an epiphany. I mean, the whole trip made me want to move to California, because we left New York that morning on, what are the jets that had like a second story? You go up a spiral staircase.
Oh, nice, yeah.
It was old school.
I
the lounge
remember
was up
those.
there. The kids couldn't go up there, but like our parents were up there.
Yeah.
But we sat my sisters and I sat right at the base of this staircase that went up. And I'm sitting there and I look up and I had just seen the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And Paul Newman walks on the plane and it's like, Paul Newman, and he sees me looking at him and he just goes, hey, kid, and like smacks my shoulder. And I thought, this is great, and then we land. And we go to the Century Plaza. My mother says, oh, kids, look, there's Gene Kelly in front of the hotel. And I thought, this is wherever you go, this is an average day, And then we're running around the lobby as my parents are checking in, and I'm not looking where I'm going. And I run into this guy's stomach, like square. And I remember thinking that there's two kinds of adults. There's the ones that'll sort of brush it off and it's okay.
Yeah.
And then there's this type who get really annoyed and like says, where are your parents? And I kind of gestured over at where they were checking in, and I knew who it was because I had just seen him on a PBS show like the week before, and it was like that face. And he takes me literally by the back of my neck, I remember thinking this is like the dean of some boarding school. It was like that, and British accent. And he marches me over to my parents, and it kind of admonishes. He says, young men should not be running around, blah, 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 blah. And my parents were all looking at each other like,
Are we getting yelled at by Alfred Hitchcock?
And my parents are mortified and they're apologetic. But then I will say that as he goes off, he kind of saves it with kind of tosses my hair and he's like, well, just be more mindful, young man, kind of thing. So I thought, who wouldn't want to live in Southern California, with all these things happening left and right.
I love that.
So that was kind of an epiphany moment for me. But and again, I always loved California. That's why, to answer your question, I moved out because I had a job opportunity. My family was here, and I loved California. So everything kind of lined up in about 1986 or so.
Yeah, no, it's so cool. So, okay, and you touched on this a little bit, but you started as a copywriter. You became a creative director at a couple of advertising agencies. Then you get to this point and you're like, okay, I want to write about what I love. And that's how your first books came about. But what kind of got you to that moment where you were kind of like, okay, I've done this. Now I want to try writing for myself?
I just kept thinking back to being a kid and wanting to see a book that I wrote in a bookstore. It was that basic.
Yeah.
It's all it was. I always thought that would be the coolest feeling if you could do that. And I thought, not getting any younger at that point. And, I thought I'll take a shot. I'll give it a year. And I had a freelance client.
Which is, by the way, very short window in the scheme of things.
Totally is. And I had already started writing book proposals and sending them out, and to no avail. We all get used to rejections up front. And I had a freelance client who said, look, you do our work for us, and you can have that year, chase your dream kind of thing. And then one day I got literally within about 2 weeks responses from two publishers. One was kind of boutique-y called Santa Monica Press, and the other was Macmillan. We were bigger.
Okay,
It was a whole range, and that was it. And I was off to the races, again. So that thankfully within the course of that year, that worked out, and at least I had a feeling that I could do this.
And then how does it end up going from there? So and we were talking about this beforehand, that I am your demographic. Like everything that you write about is the stuff that I seek. I'm a huge fan of pop culture and that idea of, walking over, that great and being like, that played this role in history. So you kind of are doing these pop culture landmarks and bringing that to life, which is amazing. Then what kind of does the shift over into, working with individuals on memoirs?
That's a great question. Through the course of, you can't just support yourself writing books. That's a very glacial process. You don't see royalties for like a year. It's still it hasn't changed a lot in 100 years. It really hasn't.
Yeah, true.
But what happened was you begin realizing that I had always wanted to write articles about these things as well. So that once you've written a couple of books, people will come to you, magazines you may have submitted to previously, and now they're inviting you to do it. So I was doing that, and I got into music journalism very heavily, and because music is a passion of mine, and I would write about a variety of bands, and there was one group called Def Leppard, and who I wrote a lot about, and we developed a relationship with. Guys in the band, including Phill Collne, especially Phill Collne, the guitar player. And we were driving once to a show. We'd become friends, and I said to him, just kind of out of the blue, have you ever thought about writing your story? Because now I've been able to watch him on a level that's very personal, and it was fascinating to me what that life is like on the other side of the curtain.
Sure.
And he said, well, I don't know. He goes, do you think anybody would find it interesting? And I said, see, that right there shows how numb you are. Your feet never touch the ground. Your life is incredible. But let's figure out how you got there. And then he got into it and was very generous. And we entered this partnership. And that was the first time I had done it. And I loved the experience. Phill and his wife, Helen, were incredible partners getting that book together. Book came out, it did well, and all of a sudden, it's like anything. If you write one of those, now you're kind of that person. You can co-write a book like that.
So true.
And soon after that, similarly with Hall & Oates,
I've written a lot about John Oates. Very cool. Also fan. Sarah Smile, everybody.
And so John and I wrote his book, and that was an incredible experience. And so that just again, you become known as that person. So I really live in two writing worlds. I have all the pop culture and history and travel.
Yeah.
And then this memoir thing, which I think I've written 14 or 15 of those books.
There is something I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you've always been kind of connected celebrity-wise. Did that start with your dad? Did it you talked about your friendship with Sally Struthers, back in the day, and you talked about I can't remember all of the people, but you have this connection with celebrity that you act like is just, I got with Def Leppard and we decided to do a book. How does that connection happen in the first place?
When we were kids, we were around a lot of people because through my father's business.
Sure.
And we were always kind of shown that it's not a big deal. These are just people, I remember the big one was in the mid 70s, an agency my dad was at, they got Halston, the designer Halston, decided he was going to like mass merchandise, I think, things he was creating. And so he needed an ad agency, and that was my dad's agency. So so we got to know as kids Halston and that whole circle, and it was like it'd be Andy Warhol and
That's so cool.
Liza Minnelli, like that whole New York City cultural elite that was happening, Studio 54 and all that. And they were just interesting, creative
people,
articulate people. They weren't, like Halston really liked my mom, and my mother loved him. He was a very charming guy. He'd always bring over, like, if he had a new like ultra suede jacket, he'd bring my mom that, or something else he was working on.
So cool.
And it was cool and it was interesting. And then, so it was never, I just liked interesting people who had good stories. It was, they didn't have to be well known.
I think that's also the other aspect of it, being here in West Hollywood, and it is such a hotbed for so many, for culture, pop culture, for sure. But again, it's that reminder, it's, these people that we might know aren't just individuals. And if you have this natural curiosity and you're asking them about stuff that maybe just a little bit deeper than, what a maybe average fan might.
That's what I think it is.
Totally.
I think it's how you approach these people and don't act like it's a big deal, because everyone's always, one thing I've learned, like, especially when you write a book with like a John Oates, and I would go out on the road with them for a bit.
So cool.
And photograph them and all that. And you see what it's like for them and just how much they appreciate somebody who doesn't freak out. I would see the fans that got through, that had good experiences, were the ones that were cool, that had something interesting to bring to the party, a take or something they hadn't really thought about, you know, that didn't feel clinging or cloying or anything like that.
Sure.
But they don't get a lot of that, So I think it's just what I get from West Hollywood, people like John Oates, is that when John played like the Troubadour a couple years ago, and I was there with him, and he begins recounting when they played the Troubadour opening for Harry Chapin in like 1972. So he brings that to life. I wrote a book with a guy named Leif Garrett, who was like a big
I'm familiar.
teen idol. And when
Get a
Leif
poster
and
in your room.
I was a little bit past that era, but I was definitely familiar with it.
But Leif behind us here with Flipper's roller disco is building right outside. And like, I remember walking, and Leif had stories about something quite dramatic that happened to him that night that ended up being in our book. So when you kind of retrace steps with people who were here during different, eras, then it's fascinating to kind of get that firsthand, flavor of what it was like.
Yeah. No.
Leif Garrett had a story about flippers.
Wait. So why don't we bring everybody up to speed with flippers? Because I just discovered flippers today. So
our office building sits on La Cienega Boulevard at the corner of La Cienega and Santa Monica Boulevard. And right across the street from us right now is a CVS pharmacy. But back in the day, it was, I think it was originally maybe a bowling alley, and then it became, in the 70s, I think, a roller disco.
Mid-70s, when that was popular.
Yeah.
And, I mean, really, where you are, it's sort of like the cultural crossroads.
Yeah.
I mean, Santa Monica and La Cienega, if we were here, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, what would have been going on those streets? It would have just pinch yourself. But and so Leif was there one night before. It was actually a tough story. It was a horrific accident later that night. But it takes you back to those times when you're, when you can relive those things. And I've been with a lot of people like that I've written with, where we'll walk these streets and they'll call things out. And just driving in here today, when I passed the Troubadour, I have a book coming out about Orange County history, but it's connected to the Troubadour. Because back, I think in 1971 or so, Linda Ronstadt, who was there a lot, didn't have a band. She had left the Stone Ponies, and she was booked to play Disneyland and needed a band to back her.
Yeah.
And so she recruits a bunch of her friends there who go down with her for this. I think it was a 2-week thing in Disneyland on the old Tomorrowland stage. And at the end of it, she's like, "This is great, you guys. I'm going to take you on the road." And they're like, "Well, wait a minute. We kind of like, this has been great, you're great, but we like our chemistry." And that was the Eagles. Like the Eagles were born out of that
I love
Disneyland, residency. So really, you drive through West Hollywood, you drive through these layers of history, and there's sort of no escaping the connections and the web of influence still exists today of where things began.
Oh my gosh, I just get such chills. I mean, I'm such a music buff in case we can't tell, so it's so cool.
I remember interviewing Glenn Frey once, and it's the same thing, just driving in here today.
Yeah.
When you pass the Troubadour, Dan Tanis is right there, and he told me the story of how he and Don Henley were having dinner there one night, and the table next to them was this kind of, what they perceived as sugar daddy and this pretty young woman. And their relationship is they started writing Lion Eyes right there at the table, inspired by what they saw there. So, it's all these things, that are still kind of hang in the air when you drive by.
A few weeks ago, we had Nick Adler sitting in that chair, talking to him about the history of the Roxy. And, growing up, like same kind of thing. He grew up with his dad, Lou Wright, at the Roxy, and had just story after story about same kind of thing.
Yeah, well, the Roxy, again, we could have a whole all-day conversation just about that little stretch right there. The fact that, you had the Roxy and obviously the whiskey and other places that are no longer there. Gazzari's was kind of on the other side of the rainbow, and Starwood and Rodney Bingenheimer's place. There really was, there's no other, the only equivalent to me that matches West Hollywood's sort of musical roots would be, and I don't think it's even the same, as powerful, but Greenwich Village in New York, that kind of scene where you had CBGBs and Max's Kansas City and lots of folk clubs. But I still think West Hollywood's, it spans more musical culture, and it's still going on. You've still got the Troubadour going strong, and the whiskey and the Roxy and the Rainbow and all. So it really is, there's nothing, I don't think, quite like it in terms of musical heritage, of what it's done to influence American culture.
What would you say, this is a tough question here, but what is it about the magic of West Hollywood, the Sunset Strip, that has led to all of this? I
actually think there's an answer to it.
Okay.
I do. I think that it's always been, going back 100 years, there was when it was called Sherman originally, named after Moses Sherman, who settled Sherman Oaks. He was a realtor. It was his thing. But it was always kind of on the fringe because it was unincorporated. And so all during Prohibition, you could find trouble in West Hollywood. It wasn't part of LA proper. Gambling wasn't allowed in Los Angeles, but it was allowed in LA County. So West Hollywood always had this sense where you could go. It was a good hangout. It was a safe hiding place.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like the other side, where I think people gravitated. Creative, interesting, free-thinking people always sort of gravitated there because the rules were different. And, you couldn't get hassled by LA cops. It was under the Sheriff's Bureau, who didn't really want to mess with it too much. So you could get away with a lot more in West Hollywood. And I think that always sort of carried forth this idea of free-thinking people who pushed boundaries, whether it was artists or whoever. And I think that carries on today. That's where I think the foundational piece of it lies.
I couldn't agree more. And it just, because it is interesting, because when you think about that and all throughout the decades and who's been here and the
gangsters. Again, you go back to the 30s and 40s, but again, it was a haven. It was a place where you were more protected than in other places. And I think that's sort of the magic of it, is the fact that it had that edge to it.
And what I love about, your writing, and just even just in talking with you, just how you could talk about driving down the street and you hear this is where this happened, and how cool to bring history to life like that.
There's just, the air is different in certain spots of the world. It just is. I see the Tail of the Pup, the most iconic hot dog stand in the world,
of course,
across the street. But it's connected to a building, the original building, where the band The Doors, was their office and their hangout space, like their clubhouse.
Yeah.
And so you drive by that and you think, what was that like in 1967? The room where you mentioned earlier, Jeff, off camera, the Alta Cienega Motel, right?
Which is
Jim's
right over
room
here.
is there, right behind you here. And that's a mecca for people today. They make these pilgrimages to go stay in that room, and scroll messages on the wall and everything. So it's just, the air hangs heavy when you think about, again, for me, the music is really what sets it apart. There's lots of other cultural things as well.
sure.
But the music, there's really, it's untouchable.
Well, I think what's so interesting, and being such a music fan myself, and seeing some of these icons, and they are icons in the proper sense of the word, when they're playing, my favorite thing is to scan the audience and to see the wide range of ages of people, and that you think of one song and like what that. That's become part of somebody's story. I saw Lionel Richie, and it's like how I identify with Lionel Richie and some of his songs is very different than how you have very specific memories. And it's so cool that I think that's what's so special about the music element.
Well, it redrew the rules. I mean, even going like, when you think of the early 80s and how hair metal on the Strip was that thing, that's the launching pad for it. There's no way around that. But bands like Van Halen, I mean, again, there's no getting around the Guns N' Roses, how this was the breeding ground of all that because it was allowed to happen.
Yeah.
It was okay to book these bands back then. That was a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Whereas other places wouldn't do it. But West Hollywood, the club culture, it was all about what was going to be next and what was going to happen next. And I think that really helped shape music. It helped shape culture in a lot of ways. That idea that anything is possible, give everyone a shot, and it's why so many bands, I mean, everybody from Led Zeppelin to Hench, everybody played on the Strip.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yes.
In clubs. There's no big venues on the Strip. It's all small clubs. When Bruce Springsteen played there in 1975, that's when he was still a club act. He went back and played the Roxy in 78, I think the night after playing the Forum, because that was an important venue for him to return to that mattered. Neil Young opened the place in 1973.
And just played there again for their 60th anniversary.
Because they get it.
50th.
The bands that go back and play the Troubadour.
Was it 50 or 60, the Roxy?
It'd be...
Was it 50?
Yeah, the Roxy opened, I think, in
Same age as Nick
70.
Adler.
I'll have to go back and listen to that episode.
73.
Same age as Nick Adler.
Okay.
73. And this year is the 60th anniversary of the Whiskey A Go-Go.
Right.
64.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Okay, I didn't realize
Big
that.
anniversary.
Oh, that's exciting.
So interesting note on anniversaries. This year is the 40th anniversary of West Hollywood becoming an incorporated city
Oh.
of its own. So you talk about the long history of being unincorporated for so long. So it lasted as unincorporated area of Los Angeles for a long time.
This is insane. But
Which
I
is
think
why those things happened, I think.
Right, but it still, I think it still carries over that sort of openness, obviously.
For sure. It's in the DNA of the place from the very beginning.
I mean, even thinking about hotels too. And it's like what's happened in these different hotels, from, the London, which way back in the day had been, it was the was it the Bellage when it was the Bellage at one point. And then did somebody throw a TV out of the window there?
That was the Andaz.
That's the
Riot
Andaz.
Hyatt.
The Riot Hyatt. And then the London, there's some other stuff that happened there.
Yeah, again, it's there's layers of coats of paint of this stuff, of things that went on. And even, the Viper Room, which is now, that's about 30 years old.
Yes.
So the time, again, that these places last, 30 years is a long time.
Very long time.
To have a club open like that. And even that's got, obviously, its own layers of history built in. Each place serves a purpose, And,
For sure, we have to get a Chris Epting West Hollywood book.
Ding,
so
ding, ding.
let's talk about what's next on your what's next on the hit parade for Chris Epting.
I think that's an incredible idea.
It is. There are books that exist. There's some on the Sunset Strip. I just saw a book of really the amazing billboards on the Sunset Strip. It was like a photo documentary.
Great book. And that's another part of the culture on the Strip, though, is how record companies figured out to be creative. It's an advertising story, how they would promote records and stuff. But I think it's a great idea because, again, there have been books about West Hollywood, but when I look at a topic like this, I like to go places that just have not been uncovered before. Yeah. I'm always in search. So I feel like I was a detective, Whenever I would watch Columbo as a kid.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Barney's Beanery was where he liked...
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah.
How did I not realize that?
He liked the chili from Barney's Beanery.
Oh my gosh, that's so fun.
And on our first trip, I remember... to California, we saw Peter Falk at Trader Vic's, which was over. Oh,
yes, by the Beverly Hilton.
Away. And so it always, these places still factor in.
Yeah.
Janis Joplin, there's a table at Barney's where she, carved her name in.
Still?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. I know I'm going later today.
So there's lots of remnants and things that exist that I think would make a great book to go deep and figure these stories out.
It's so fascinating because again, it's like all of these stories, and I mean, you can even just hear my reaction, thinking, "Oh, I've been there and didn't know that," or "I didn't see that."
I remember taping an
this.
episode. I used to do a TV show on the Reels channel called "It Happened Here," and we did an episode on John Belushi. So of course, we're at the Rainbow. It was Last Night Alive.
Yeah.
And even in there, you've got like Robert De Niro in the room that night, all these personalities. And then he goes to the Chateau Marmont, of course, where he tragically dies. But I remember when I was writing Leif Garrett's book with him, and Leif told me how he had been brought over to Belushi's room at the Chateau a couple nights before he died. He was like part of that
group,
weird scene, you know, at 15 years old or whatever. So again, when you can, retrace steps of people that were actually there, it gives you this whole other view of it that you would never know otherwise.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I get chills as you say it, because again, it's like when you know these people and you know parts of the story or the history, and then
it's
kind of
mythical. No, these stories are mythical.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great word for it. And I mean, we're living right here in it, which is awesome.
Yeah. I always say, in West Life, there is like this pixie dust that you kind of feel when you're walking around. I'm not really like there is a soul to the place.
I always love to do this, and I'm curious to hear what you'll say, but I have this playing favorites game. So and we're totally allowed to play favorites, but let's say you've got, maybe you have a close friend or somebody that's coming to West Hollywood. What are some favorite places that you suggest, hey, definitely be sure to check out this, whether it's, a place to get a burger or for lunch or dinner, a hotel to get a drink at. What are some spots that are always kind of those must-hit places if somebody's...
We've talked about a few of them. I mean, obviously the Troubadour.
Yeah.
I mean, the Roxy, the Rainbow, the Whiskey, the Viper Room. You have to do those places.
Yeah, all the music venues.
The hotel, the Sunset Marquis is again, just...
iconic.
Yeah. I mean, I've done more great interviews just in that place.
Yeah.
This is a recording studio inside where a lot of great music has happened as well. So that's kind of my short list. I mean, the Jim Morrison Hotel Room, I've walked many people there myself. For fans that are a fan, like the band The Doors, is a great little walking tour you can do within just a couple of blocks. This really was ground zero for that band.
Yeah.
And those are kind of my starting points. But if you can see live music as a big live music fan at the Troubadour and think about, well, that's where Elton John really points to as his launch point. You know what I mean? So many bands from Linda Ronstadt, Elton John, Hall & Oates got essentially their start there.
Yeah.
You got a good review playing the Troubadour by Robert Hilburn in the LA Times, the 70s. You were on your way, and that happened for a lot of bands there. So I always encourage people, if you can, to go see a show there, especially. And the Whiskey. I mean, these places are, they still book fairly frequently. Most nights there's music there. There's no excuse to not go experience it.
And it's, I mean, if you really look, you can even see some people that are actually iconic, that they are now coming back and they're playing there, just whether they're wanting to stay close to their roots.
Yeah, it is. You talk about the Troubadour. The other night I saw Carla Bonoff sing, and she was just giving this random story about how she got her start at the Troubadour.
Love
and
that.
She played in Orange County, I think it was a night or two after, at the Coach House. And I should have gone because I love Carla Bonoff, but she's part of that cultural DNA.
She was
of
talking
the early
about how
70s.
she was, I don't know if she was opening for Jackson Browne, but she said that's really where Jackson Browne got his start too. And they both, he took off a couple years before she did, and then she met Linda Ronstadt and wrote some songs for her and just ended up having a whole career. And she was giving complete credit to her experience at the Troubadour.
Yeah. Well, that place really, it's one of the most sacred venues on earth in terms of what it gave the world. There's no way around it. And it's because of how Doug Weston, it's how they ran these places. And I think that stems from the West Hollywood spirit, where it was openness, it was faith, it was paying performers, it was feeding performers, it was giving them a place to hang out and actually exist.
Yeah.
And not having a ton of rules or anything like that. And that's what led to that, kind of subculture existing like that. You wouldn't have had the Laurel Canyon sound without the Troubadour. It just wouldn't have existed.
Yeah.
I just finished a book with Dave Mason. And when he first came here, the Troubadour shows for him, he credits those as being really where he first connected with cultural society in Southern California. That
Yeah.
was the place to be. For me, West Hollywood, honestly, there's no other place in the world, if you think about it, per capita, that's got those kinds of landmarks that are still open, that still book relevant bands. It just doesn't exist anywhere else.
And walking
in New York or
distance.
anywhere,
Yeah.
Chicago, San Francisco, they've got their music scenes, but you can't rattle off those names. Because in New York, the places are all gone. The Bottom Line, Max, the CBGBs, they're gone.
Yeah.
Great memories, but they're no longer there. You've got them here. And that's more to the point of preservation as well, why it really matters to get people to support these places.
Oh
and
my gosh, of
remind people of why they matter so they don't go away. This goes on and on. But again, West Hollywood's personality is very distinct. It's very unique. And I think it's very magical in terms of what exists in Southern California. There's really nothing else like it.
Yeah.
Nothing even really close to it.
I think on that note,
I think
Chris,
exactly that was a mic drop moment right
that
there.
was amazing.
It's the truth.
Thank
love
you so
it.
much for coming up today.
Yeah.
It's great to see you. It's great to hear this. These stories, amazing.
Anytime. It went by too quick. I feel
know.
like we need like a part two
Oh,
soon.
we definitely need a part
We
two.
barely scratched the surface.
Well,
That's the
I
other
know.
part two. We just did
We
only so much in this,
Oh,
in this time
sign
today.
me up.
so
And definitely this West Hollywood book needs to, yeah.
We're going to make that happen.
we'll come back and
I'm
talk
buying
about that.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah,
you.
thank you.